talking thousands. And so this is not a time for you to go, well, if so-and-so would have preached it, they would have preached it like this, or right. This is a time for you to go, oh my goodness, I have the opportunity to be a part of something. And in 20 years, when people talk about Pastor Emily, you can say, I was there. I was there when she did it the first time at the bridge, right? And I love the preaching series. And so everybody who preached in this series, I gave them the topic that I wanted them to preach on so that we all kind of fit together. And so Pastor Charlie preached on David because I asked him to. And I've asked Pastor Emily to preach on Ezekiel, and that's not an easy thing to preach on, right? But when you talk about a series where we talk about pieced together, I think the story of Ezekiel is the perfect example of that. So this morning, would you pray, encourage, and support Pastor Emily as she comes to deliver the word?
Amen.
So she kind of gave away that I'm going to talk about Ezekiel, but I don't know how many people have just sat and read through Ezekiel, but it's kind of like a wild ride the entire time. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the history of Ezekiel, and then there's a couple of passages that I'm going to dive a lot deeper into, and Daniel's going to come and help me read one of those passages in just a second. But some history on Ezekiel is the people of Israel are in exile, and Ezekiel is called to be a prophet for them. But in his calling to be a prophet, God tells him, they're not going to listen to you. They're going to hurt your feelings the whole time, but I'm still going to call you to do it. And so Ezekiel is willing to do that, but it doesn't make sense a lot of the time. So the first part of Ezekiel, the stories don't make sense. There's a lot of weird stuff happening. Ezekiel is doing exactly what God told him to. What? Oh, let's see. Okay. But it doesn't make a lot of sense. Am I talking too quiet? Yeah. Oh, that's cute. Good luck. In his first vision, he has an encounter where he sees the temple. And for the people of Israel, the temple is where they understood God to live. But it was sad for him to see the temple because they had been pushed into exile. And so they're living in Babylon, which is not their home. They are enslaved there. And they're kind of like stuck in the wilderness, not really sure what's going on. But they feel like they've been abandoned by God, and they're left alone. What they don't tell you, in all their weeping and gnashing of teeth, is they are in exile because of all the hundreds of years of poor decisions that they made leading up to God saying, okay, and so now it's time for you to learn how to live without me, but I'm not actually sending you away from me, I'm just sending you to a new place. And so in this vision at the beginning of Ezekiel, he has this encounter where he understands that God is on a throne that can move, and in his vision, this throne moves out towards Babylon. And so he's trying to tell the people that God is with them, but they only understand that God lives in the temple. And so that is kind of how we start. We start with this crazy vision that doesn't make any sense, that doesn't match the context of what they understand about God, and now they're supposed to understand that God is with them. And so there's lots of things that happen in between. Daniel, are you ready to come read? Okay. So there's lots of things that happen in between. Another vision happens. It's even more confusing. And then we get to Ezekiel chapter 37. The first 33 chapters of Ezekiel are like doom and gloom. And then 34 through 48 are like the hope for Israel, right? And so chapter 37, verses 1 through 14 is probably my favorite passage in the Bible. And if that tells you how big of a nerd I am, great. But Daniel's going to read it for us.
Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 1 through 14. The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. And he said to me, Prophesy to these bones and say to them, Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. That's what the Sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, Son of Man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come, breathe from the four winds and breathe into these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath entered them, and they came to life, and they stood on their feet, a vast army. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord, when I open your graves and bring them up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord.
Thank you. So that's kind of a long passage just to talk about, but it's the entire vision there, and then kind of the explanation of what the vision is about. So at the beginning, it says, the Lord of the hand was upon me, and he brought me out into this valley of dry bones. Some cultural context there. The Israelites were instructed not to have any interaction with something that had died. And so that Ezekiel was so in tune with God that he trusted him to guide him through a valley of something that was dead. There's just so much there. And so they're walking around, and they're bones that have been dead for a long time. It's not like something was slain yesterday, and you're like, oh, well, I would have preferred not to see that. But it's something that's been there for a while. They're sun-bleached, they're dried, they're scattered around because the animals have come and they have done what nature does, right? And God says to Ezekiel, you think we can make these live? I think if God asked me a question that has such a stupidly obvious answer, the dry, dead bones are dead. Like, they're not going to do anything. We don't think they're going to walk away, right? And so Ezekiel kind of has like a smart aleck response, right? He's like, oh, God, I think you know the answer to this one. Like, I'm going to just leave it up to you. And so it's not that he doubts the divine ability. He's just human. And so he's like, I don't want to have the wrong answer. And I don't want to be like so uppity. But like, God, I think you have the right answer. And so God's like, okay, so tell the bones to come together. And so Ezekiel, and I don't know how Ezekiel does this. He doesn't like go, me? You want me to do that? You think I'm going to, okay. So Ezekiel calls out to the bones that are dry, that have not been alive for a long time, and they come together. And it says they come together bone to bone. Then they grow muscle, then they grow skin. If you know anything about the process of natural decaying, that's the exact opposite way of how something would break down, which to me kind of highlights that God is going to walk with us and help us rebuild the things that have died, whether we chose for them to die or someone chose things for us that made something die, that God is going to bring life back into that step by step. And so God then says, okay, so now you see we have like a field of zombies. That would be so freaky. You're just looking out at a field, it's all dry bones, and then God's like, do this big thing, and you're like, okay, God, I can do the big thing, and then you're like, oh, what have we done? God, there's no way this is what you thought was going to happen. And then God's like, okay, so now it's time to do it again. And so throughout this passage, it's 14 verses, the Hebrew word ruach is used 10 times. And that English translation is wind, breath, or spirit. And so he tells Ezekiel to call out to the wind to bring in the spirit. So this is one of the few times that we see reference to the Holy Spirit, because he's talking about God's own spirit is going to be brought into the people. It's not just the breeze that blows across the valley. And so this word ruach is used again. He's like, okay, so now we're going to bring up the spirit, we're going to make them breathe again. And so Ezekiel listens. Again, no questions. He's like, okay, prophesy to the winds, winds come out. And this word breathe that they use is only referenced one other time in the Old Testament, and it's in the creation story in Genesis 2, when God breathes life into Adam for the first time. And so we have now a vast army. No idea where these bones came from. Now we have an army. But Ezekiel was faithful. And so I think it's important to see that when Ezekiel was in the other visions, he was a bystander. He saw the vision, God imparted the knowledge, and then he was supposed to go and tell the people of Israel. In this vision, he's invited to be an active participant in what's happening. God didn't say, watch, I'm going to bring this valley of dry bones back together. He said, Ezekiel, prophesy to them. And so I think that shows not only that God is willing to invite us to participate in stories to bring life back to ourselves and to each other, but also that Ezekiel was willing to do it. Because he didn't say, oh, but God, somebody else is going to come tomorrow, and they like bones a lot more than I do, so I'm going to let them take care of the bones. And he didn't just do step one. And he was like, okay, so I did my heavy lifting, and now I think somebody else is surely going to show up soon, and hopefully maybe they're ready to do something because I did my one good thing, and I'm good. Have a great life. And so we see Ezekiel's faithfulness through the story. At the end of it, so the beginning of verse 11, God tells Ezekiel what the bones represent. And it was the entire house of Israel. I wonder how Ezekiel felt knowing that the valley of desolation that he was looking at was representing all of the people that he held so dear to him. The people that he was willing to be mocked by, that he was willing to be belittled by, to be in line with what God was asking him to do, to bring salvation to these people that had left God. And then God said, now bring them back to life. How often do we look at a situation and we're like, oh, they are long dead. They can stay over there. That is somebody else's problem. And God said, no, I called you to prophesy to the bones. And you're like, oh, I just think probably that's somebody else's problem. What if God's calling us to prophesy to the bones? God talks about that it's the house of Israel, and their complaint is, they say, our bones are dried up, our hope is gone, and we are cut off. In Hebrew, that would have rhymed, and so they would have sang it like this dirge all the time. Our bones are dried up, our hope is gone, we're cut off. And that's how they would have conversated with each other. That's what they would have said while they were walking places. That's how they understood themselves in relationship to God. In a couple commentaries that I read, they said that it's very common for that to happen in times of exile. But in this specific passage, I talked about that God doesn't belittle their feelings or their experience, but just talks about how he's going to transform it. He doesn't go, oh, well, I mean, you made poor choices, so this is what happens. He's like, but watch how I can bring life back into it. And so at this point, we move from a narrative where the bones are dry and they're laying on the ground. And then God says he's going to pull up and open our graves and bring life to the things that have been long dead. So whenever you care about something and it dies, then you bury it, typically. You have a way that you, just if it's a pet or a creature that lives on a farm, or I'm sure all of us have been to a funeral, we have caskets and graveyards and things. So when we care about something, we take great care in how it's going to decay in the earth. When you're in a hurry, or a lot of things die all at once, then that's when you get the valley of dry bones. And so it just sits, it's sun bleached. You have no idea what's going to happen to it. You really hope the animals don't drag too much of it off, or you don't care at all. And that's why they're there. So that God is moving from a narrative of mass destruction, all the things that whether we made decisions that made them die, or people made decisions for us, it was a situation we entered that was already dying or dead. And he moves to a narrative of, maybe this was a dream you wanted and it didn't work out. So you put it in a box, you buried it, leave it in the corner. Occasionally you think about it. This is the thing that God called you to. World said, you're not good enough for that. You can't do that. So You get told no enough times, you put it in a box, you bury it, you leave it. I don't know what are the things that we bury. Everybody has a different thing. But if you bury it, it's something you cared about. So God is also saying, not only am I going to bring life to the times that maybe we haven't made the best decisions, He's also going to bring life to the things that other people sometimes have decided need to die and are buried. And so He says, I'm going to open your graves and I will bring you out and I will bring life to them. The last verse says, and then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken and I have done it. It's kind of like a seal that happens a lot in the Old Testament when God's like, I'm going to do these things, but I'm going to do them for my glory. And so you're going to live to tell the stories of the glory of me to your ancestors. They will hear about it from their ancestors to the further generations. And so God is going to do these things, and He's going to restore the people of Israel, but He's not doing it because the people of Israel have done anything to come back to God. But God is proving over and over again His goodness and His willingness to pursue them even when they don't pursue Him. And so I find it really interesting that this is the only vision of the 4 visions that Ezekiel has throughout the book that is not dated. The other ones start, and there's this very meticulous system for how it is dated and when it happened and how he encountered God. But in this particular one, it's not. We just know that he encounters God, they go to a valley. And so many scholars believe that this is so that we can, in any context, understand that it's for us. There is not one specific set of people that this applies to because it applies to all of us. It wasn't just for the Israelites that were in exile in Babylon, but it applies to all of us. And He's willing to bring life to the graves in our lives even today. Another passage in Ezekiel that is the end of another vision, but we're going to skip about 10 chapters, is to Ezekiel 47. And so I think it's really interesting how detailed Ezekiel's visions are, because some of the other prophets, it's very vague. And you're like, man, I really wonder what happened. I wonder how many feet long the walls were going to be. Worry not. Ezekiel gives you all of it. And so at the end of this vision, they have basically what we miss from 37 to 47 is the meticulous description of what the rebuilt temple will be like whenever they come to the new city. I think it's really cool that they never talk about it being in Israel or in Jerusalem. It's just going to be a new temple and God is going to live there. And so I think we can also apply that to that God lives with us each day. But at the end of that vision, it talks about how they're about to walk out, and his guide is like, oh, look, there's water like trickling out of the altars and running out of the throne room and out into the yard. Y'all, they are in a desert. There shouldn't be any water. There's not a pipe leaking somewhere. Somebody should probably be concerned. This word trickling only appears one time in the Old Testament, and it's in Ezekiel 47. And so it's sort of like this babbling brook that's coming out from underneath the altar. I don't know how many of you are outdoorsy people and have experienced a natural brook, but they have some of the purest and cleanest water that the earth can create. And so when I traveled this summer, I got to see some. And from somebody that lives in Southeast Texas, all I see is mud and marsh. And so to see clear water bubbling up out of the ground is like a concept that doesn't make sense to me, because you could literally just scoop it up and drink it, and like there's not bacteria in it, there's not like stuff growing in it, right? It's just clean, fresh water. And if you did that to the water that's out with the sheep, you know, that's probably not the best idea. And so to understand that in this description, it's the freshest water that you can get on the earth in the middle of the desert. And so they follow it. He's like, come on, let's figure out why this water is trickling and let's see where it goes. So they follow it, and he says they measure 1,000 cubits, which is like 1,500 feet, or like a quarter of a mile. And they walk through this water that's like ankle deep. And remember, it's just like bubbling out of a crack in the floor underneath the altar. And then they measure another 1,000 feet, and they walk through it, and this time it's like knee deep, so we're at like half a mile. And they're wading through this water that started at a trickle. And then they measure another 1,000 cubits, another quarter mile, and they walk through it, and it's waist deep. And then they go one more section, and it gets to the point where it's at their chest, and this guide's like, I don't know if I can swim, so we're going to turn around. And so I think there's a lot of layers to that. What kind of faith does it take to walk through water that you know you can't swim in? I know how to swim. I taught many of my siblings how to swim. That is such an interesting experience. I don't remember a time not knowing how to swim, so I have no fear of being in water. I have siblings that can't swim, and we have a fear of him being around water. I don't know if he does or not, but we are wary for him when we are around water because we know that he doesn't know how to swim. So Ezekiel was raised in the middle of the desert, probably wasn't a lot of like, let's go swimming adventures, and he's walking. Walking through water has a lot of resistance, so it's not like just walking a mile. I mapped it this morning. If you walk out of our front door and you walk down Gulfport Road up to the light at 90, that's a little under a mile. So they walked that far through water that got consistently deeper. I'm not a big walker. It's not really my adventurous thing. So I think like just walking from here to there, I would be like, wow, I got a lot of exercise in today. I'm ready to go home and take a nap. To walk that far through water that got deeper, I would really be ready for that nap by the time we got there. They didn't just poof back to the temple. He said, okay, so let's turn around. So they turn around and they walk another mile back through water that gets gradually easier to walk through. And they get back to the riverbank and it's transformed. The whole time they're walking, he talks about where this river is going to dead end because they didn't get to see the end of it because it got deeper than they could walk in. But he said this river will dead end into the Dead Sea, and it will flush out all of the things that make it not inhabitable, and it will be a spring of fresh water. It will bring multitudes of fish, and it will have such nutritious value on the sides that all of the trees will bear fruit monthly, not annually, monthly. The leaves will never die, and they will be able to heal people like for medicinal values. So I think it's interesting that they walk a mile out. It gets super, super hard. They get to an area where they can't survive. They turn around and they walk back. They've left a temple that was in the desert, and when they get back, they're at a temple that he describes all of these trees being on the riverbank. I'm sorry, when we left, it was a trickle coming out of the temple that was ankle deep, and they come back to a riverbed. I'm a visionary, learner, understander, all the things. And so I think a lot of times in pictures, I think I get this from my mom. She's very picture storyteller, all the things. And so I imagine that Ezekiel is walking back, and he's tired, and he's like, man, I get to go sit in the sun by the temple and recover because this is way harder than I thought it was going to be. Because I thought I was just going to watch a vision from God again, and he made me walk a mile in water. And they get back, and it's like when you turn down a driveway that has like the big trees on both sides and they connect in the top, and it's super shady, and like you can immediately feel the temperature difference even if you're in your car. And there's intentionality with how the trees are planted, so they're far enough apart that you don't hit them, but they're close enough that they touch each other on the top. And like, I don't know, something about that is so picturesque to me and so peaceful. And I think that's probably what Ezekiel was thinking about when he was walking back. And he was like, oh, there's trees to lay under. It's going to be shady, and I'm going to get to rest. The trees are also going to bear fruits, not just once a year, but every month. And so something that should happen once every 12 months is going to happen every month. I'm not really good at math, but like that's a lot more often than it should happen, which means there's going to be a lot more that is produced by a single plant, which means there's going to be an abundance of the people who draw to the temple to worship. I think it's also important to see that the water is going to bring life to the Dead Sea. How many things in our lives do we just go, oh, that's dead. We don't talk about it. It doesn't do anything. We don't really touch it. Occasionally we walk by it, but we just know it's dead and it stays over there. That's kind of what the Dead Sea was. There wasn't fish in it. You couldn't really do anything in it. You would collect water out of it to get the salt so that you could preserve stuff, but that was the only thing it was good for. I think sometimes stuff happens in our lives and we're like, oh, that's really just good for one thing. Not even really that thing, because I can find it somewhere else if I need to, so I'm just going to leave it alone. I think in this, Ezekiel is shown by God that maybe it's not easy to get there. Maybe we have to walk a mile through water that's progressively harder to walk through, and then turn around and walk back. But he's willing to bring life into an area that we've already put up the caution tape. We know we're not going over there. Put up the guardrail. Nobody's getting in that. So maybe you're like, okay, she told us two really random stories that don't make any sense. That's very true. They can be sewn together if we take a little bit of time to see that. In the Valley of the Dry Bones, God walks into a situation that we look at and we're like, these are dry bones. They're not really going to do anything. Not really sure. I don't even think I could decorate with these. Like, they're just there. They're taking up space. They're the accumulation of every bad decision the people of Israel have made for hundreds of years. And God said, let the people take care of it. So they were slain by their enemies in battle. That is the Valley of Dry Bones. And sometimes it's the Dead Sea that is completely flooded by the life from the sanctuary, is what my version of the Bible said. And that's why those trees were going to bear so much fruit, was because they were fed by the water from the sanctuary. And I think there's something beautiful about that, because I wonder how many people we are investing in outside of our time here so that they can bear fruit more than just once a year when they show up for Christmas or Easter, right? Are we building and overflowing into the dead seas around us so that their trees can bear fruit more often than just annually? But I think the thing that sticks out to me the most in 37 is that God was like, okay, Ezekiel, and so now you prophesy. And Ezekiel's like, great, prophesy. And he's like, okay, I don't really understand what just happened, but I did it. And then God's like, okay, so now prophesy to the wind. God could have just like, here you go, look, they can breathe. But he invites Ezekiel to be an active participant. I think it's also really cool that Ezekiel didn't know who was in the valley when he brought them back to life. I wonder if he would have moved faster or slower, or exactly the same if he had known the history of what was in the valley at the beginning of the vision. If God had set him down over coffee, he's like, so on Tuesday, we're going to wander through the valley of the bones of your people that were slain in battle. And then I just want you to like follow the instructions I give you. Or he's more of a fly by the seat of his pants kind of guy. And it didn't bother him at all. I'm a planner. I would have liked to know the plan from the beginning. If God had asked me to do step 1, I'm like, okay, but like, so then what's going to happen next? Ezekiel was just like, I got you. Good to prophesy. And he did. And so I think that both of these passages show us that God just wants to bring life back to us, and through us, life into other people. And so I don't know if your story looks like you're the dry bones that need to be called back to life. I don't know if your story looks like you're Ezekiel and God has asked you to do something and you're like, not really sure about that one. Or maybe you are Ezekiel and you are walking through ankle deep water and it's getting to knee deep water and you're like, this is kind of more effort than I was willing to put in. I think it's time for me to turn around and go back to the temple. I don't know where you're at, but I encourage you to take time to figure out where you're at and ask God what your next step looks like. That's about all I have. I'm not sure how to finish.
I think she did a beautiful job of connecting two very difficult stories. But I think she did more than that. I think she planted some seeds in our heart. She connected some visions. And I don't know about you, but I know that I walk away with a new look at what the bridge looks like. Right? I'll never look at these altars the same. right? May there be a place where fresh water, where the Spirit trickles out. And by the time it gets a mile from here, the Spirit is chest high, right? And that we are willing to do the work to walk through it. That the things in our life that we look at and say, that's just dry bones. And God says, I got some work for you. We say, for me? This morning, I'm going to spend some time praying, and I hope that you take this opportunity to reflect on what God is saying to you about these stories. What do you walk away with today? What did God drop in your heart from these stories that you don't want to forget? Maybe there was something new that you didn't realize was a part of the story, or maybe God showed you that there's something in your life, a calling that you had, a story that was about you, something that you have buried, and God says, oh, no, we're going to bring that thing to life. I think if we all stood and as we left today, I ask each person, what did you get from today? Everybody's going to tell me something different. That's how the Holy Spirit works. But I know that if you were listening, God dropped something for you. And so as I pray, would you ask God to remind you over and over again this week what it is that's different from now on, because you heard the word from Ezekiel this morning. God, as we come to you this morning, we thank you. We thank you that in a world that everybody says is hopeless, that you continue to call out hope. That you raise up new leaders and new pastors and new preachers in situations where people have actually just given up on their entire generation. And yet here they stand. Gen Z rocked it in this church this morning, and I love that. They have helped prepare the meal. They have delivered the Bible studies. They have delivered the word, and they are not gone. And they have dumped life into us Gen Xers and the millennials and the boomers in the room, God. And we walk out this morning with a new understanding that these crazy stories weren't put in Ezekiel just for us to have something strange to read. They were put there for us to understand that God works in amazing ways, and he invites us to be a part of it. God, not only individually may we never be the same this morning, but as the bridge at Calvary Church of the Nazarene, may we never be the same. May our altars open and flood out into the neighborhoods and push out the dead seas that live around us, God. And when we turn around and walk back, may we be overwhelmed at the fruit that's growing. Because it's your story, not ours. Thank you for the word that was delivered this morning. Thank you for the meal and the fellowship that we are about to share in. God, I love you so much. And I love that I was right here this morning. I will never be the same because of the delivery of your word. I am thankful. Amen. Well, because we have our back porch and because the weather is so nice, we do not have to move a bunch of chairs and do the tables like we usually do. The back porch is ready for us to eat on, but we do need everybody's help. We're going to put the food inside just so that we don't get the flies, right? And so we're going to set up the food on the inside, and then we're all going to fellowship. Pastor Emily and I, and anybody who wants to help us, we're going to gather the quilts really quick, because the last thing I want to do is anoint them with spaghetti sauce. And so we're going to gather those real quick and get those safe as we serve spaghetti this morning. Enjoy your afternoon together.
Yeah, I agree.